I'm joined here now by Dave Nellist, who is the National Chair of the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition. Dave, firstly, you're at Warwick speaking about the EU debate. Why do you want to leave?
Well, I think since its inception and increasingly over the last 25 years, the EU stands for the employers' union. It's a construct which favours big business, and in its treaties and its directives, it's eating away at public ownership, it's promoting privatisation, liberalisation, marketisation of essential services in transport, in energy, in water, postal services and other things. And I want to see a new Europe. I'm in favour of internationalism. I want one where working people can cooperate in a socialist way and basic public industries can be publicly owned. The EU is an obstacle to that.
But do you think that if we were to leave on the 23rd of June, it was something that was spoken about briefly tonight, there would be a Europe that favours right-wing interests? Obviously you come at it from a left-wing perspective. Do you think that we'd just have restrictions on immigration?
I think, regretfully, politics in certain parts of Europe is moving in that direction already. Look at Austria, look at Hungary, look at the prospect of Le Pen winning the presidency in France. For those who say staying in the EU is for harmony, sweetness and light, they've got to look at the way in which those potential changes could take place to the heads of government. And it's the 28 heads of government, all of whom are pro-capitalist, pro-market. 19 of the 28 are within the equivalent of the Tory party in terms of constructs within the European Parliament. Some are worse than the Tory party, as I've already mentioned. So staying within the EU in an organisation which is designed to strengthen the control of capitalism over the whole of the continent, it's just allowing Thatcherism to be writ on a continental scale.
Do you feel honestly let down or betrayed by Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell? You're a long-term sort of friend of Corbyn and political ally. You come at the same political spectrum, and he had a really good opportunity, you'd perhaps argue, to really change the discourse on this particular debate.
Well, Jeremy and I were elected in '83 on a Labour Party manifesto against the EC, and we've held those views, my case still today. Jeremy, even in the summer when he was campaigning to be Labour leader, was doing meetings around the country where, when he was asked a question about David Cameron's renegotiations, he at least had the position of, let's see what Cameron comes back with, and if that impacts on working people, their families and their union rights and so on, then Labour will still be against it. Unfortunately, within about 10 days of him being elected in September of last year, he signed this Faustian pact with Hilary Benn in order to preserve Hilary Benn and some other right-wingers within the shadow cabinet, and promised to become second fiddle in David Cameron's orchestra when it came to the referendum. And I think there's a big chance being missed. I can see on the 23rd of June either a leave vote or a close Remain vote, David Cameron being toast that night, fractions within the Tory party erupting into open warfare. A unified Labour and trade union movement was arguing for leave and against the Tories could take advantage of that and demand not just a change of Tory leader but a general election to change the government. So in that sense, I think Jeremy and John have missed a golden opportunity to take their brand of politics forward in this country.
You describe yourself in the debate as an internationalist and socialist. One of the key arguments for Remain is, we can't be internationalist if we leave the EU. How would you see sort of British internationalism if we were to leave the EU?
Well, I made the point in the debate that when it comes to things like human rights, which are governed by the Council of Europe, that's a body of 47 countries, not the 28 of the European Union. When it comes to playing football in Europe, UEFA is 57 countries, not the 27 of the EU. When it comes to the Eurovision Song Contest, it's 52 countries, including Israel and Australia, which stretches the boundaries of Europe quite a distance. It's not the 28 of the EU. In other words, in all sorts of different aspects of life, there are ways of organising on an international and a European scale, not through the narrow confines of the politics and the economics of the EU itself. I would want Britain leaving on the 23rd, then engaging through trade unions and socialist campaigns. Let's give a just off-the-cuff and immediate suggestion for a European-wide £10 an hour minimum wage. Because if people weren't forced to flee from low-paying countries, particularly in former Eastern Europe, to the countries of Germany and Britain, because of the disparity of wages, they could perhaps choose to live and love where their families are without having to leave their families to seek work. So let's have the sort of Europe that lifts wages and lifts everybody's living standards, not just makes big profits of big corporations.
And that's not possible in the EU. It's unreformable in that sense.
Oh, absolutely. To change a treaty, you need the unanimous vote of 28 heads of government. As I said, the vast majority of votes, and not just Tories or pro-capitalists, some of them are even worse than that. I see see no prospect of democratic change within the EU, but I do see the possibility on June the 23rd, if we vote no, we could shape a new government in this country and a new form of internationalism.
Just a few more questions. Tusk, you're obviously the national chair, and they did field a lot of candidates in the 2015 election. Where I am in Kingston, we had a candidate called Laurel Fogarty who stood. Did you realistically think that they were going to be the main opposition to the EU? Because I know you applied to be the official campaign.
No, we stood 750 candidates in the 2015 election, over 600 for the councils and about 130 for Parliament. We were the sixth largest party that you've never heard of in those elections, and that's because we got so little coverage. We stood hundreds of candidates in the council elections this year, and the only debate that took place on the local BBC radio CWR was for 30 minutes 5 days before the election. So socialist anti-austerity candidates, even with relatively large numbers of 10 to 15% of the national total, still don't get those arguments coming across, and that obviously has an impact when it comes to elections. But we did get anti-austerity councillors elected in places like Southampton. We came close in parts of the north west. We got loads of towns and cities where we were getting 2,000-3,000 votes. It's something to build on, but no, at the moment we're quite clear and modest where we are. We stand in large numbers of candidates, but we're averaging about 3.5-4% of the vote.
And what have you thought about the nature of the debate? I mean, obviously it's been quite egotistically driven, some would argue. I mean, the side you advocate has really been driven by Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, which I imagine you're quite dismayed at. What have you thought about that?
Well, Tusk applied to the Electoral Commission to be the main Leave campaign, or if we weren't acceptable as that we put strong arguments for there to be no Leave campaign chosen, because the differences between Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson and their supporters were relatively minor, and the agenda between what has emerged as the Remain and Leave campaigns on such things as austerity, on such things as public ownership, doesn't allow the sort of debate that would have happened had there been an independent working class and socialist alternative. But we stood that because we didn't want the debate to be diverted down the road that Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson have taken it, particularly on the question of migration and the racism that has come about because of that.
And just finally, do you think we should have a general election after this EU referendum? It's something you touched on briefly in the debate. Obviously, if it's a very close vote, you would argue that a general election is necessary, would you?
If it's a very close vote, I think David Cameron will go. There could well be some either resignations, by-elections or defections of Tory MPs. They've only got a 12-seat majority. I think Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour and trade union movement should be demanding, not just on the 24th of June, that there is a change in the leader of the Tory party, whether it's a vote for Leave or a close Remain vote, but actually recognising the fact that on a 24% of the popular turnout, this Tory government does not represent the majority of the country, and on an issue that's engaged people in the way this now has engaged people, on the 24th of June, I think it's right we should be talking about a general election and a realignment of parliamentary representatives more in line with where people are thinking about politics now, not how they were thinking about politics a couple of years ago.
And would you be prepared to sort of an unofficial alliance with Jeremy Corbyn?
I don't think there's any prospect of me as an individual ever being admitted to a member of the Labour Party, because Jeremy doesn't run the Labour Party. Yeah. He's got about a dozen mates in Parliament and a couple of hundred Labour MPs are against him, and the machinery up and down the country. So, for example, in Coventry, the cuts that were implemented by the Labour Council were exactly in line with previous years. There was no change whatsoever just because Jeremy had been elected as leader. But a working arrangement, I've actually tried to put this forward, that Labour itself was founded 116 years ago as a federal coming together of different socialist societies and the trade unions, and that could be a model for the future. It's a model that actually Tony Benn tried to put forward in the 1980s of socialists inside and outside the Labour Party cooperating, and I'd well be prepared to discuss with Tusk cooperating with Labour. We wrote to every Labour candidate standing for election, the May election, saying if you're against austerity, you want to fight the cuts, we will support you. We won't put up candidates against you. We will help in that battle. However, if you're just going to bend the knee and carry out another few million cuts in youth facilities, in libraries, in adult social care, then we will put anti-austerity candidates up against you. That's a sort of cooperation that I'm more than happy to discuss. If there's a fight taking place from Labour, Socialists outside Labour would want to support that. But if Labour's carrying on the same old austerity, they're going to be opposed.
Thank you very much for joining me today.